So going back to this definition of science by the NSTA, I would say this is true if you're referring to observational science. It is, or should be, objective, unbiased, and using the scientific method to come to conclusions about the here and now, right? What's happening in the present. But it's not true if we're referring to historical science, because that has happened in the unobservable past, which none of us has witnessed, because this is very subjective and biased and based on our starting point or our worldview as to whether or not a supernatural element is involved. So to put it another way, when it comes to historical science, the real question is, do we start with God's word, or do we start with man's idea? Because none of us has a time machine. That would be cool. But we don't, right? We can't go back in the past and see how these things have come to be in the present. So our starting points really determine how do we interpret the evidence and that we have today and the conclusions in that we draw about the past. A lot of people will say science is objective. And I'll say, I agree. The problem is scientists are not, right? They're subjective, especially when it comes to historical science. Everyone has a bias. The question is, what bias are you biased with, right? So do we start with the infallible word from the infallible God, or do we start with fallible words and ideas from fallible man when it comes to understanding origin? So now that we understand there's two types of science, right? Observational and historical, let's move on to our next question of what is scientism? So Wikipedia defines it as the belief that science and the scientific method are the best or only way to render truth about the world and reality. The New Fontana Dictionary of Modern Thought defines it as the view that the characteristic inductive methods of the natural sciences means like biology, chemistry, physics, are the only source of genuine factual knowledge, and in particular, that they alone can yield true knowledge about man and society. Another Wikipedia-type website says this, that scientism is the view that science is the absolute and only justifiable access to truth, and only science can render truth about the world and reality. And now listen closely, what else does it do? Determine normative values in society. So let me summarize what we just learned. So scientism says science is the best or only way to determine truth. It's the only source of facts. It alone is true knowledge. It is the only absolute justifiable way to truth. It's the only truth about the world and reality. And it is the only thing that determines values in society. You know what this is, y'all? This is the religion of science, right? This is the worship of science. But don't take my word for it. Let's look at how some well-known scientists and philosophers embody the idea that science is the answer to everything and it's all there is. Let's see how they embrace and champion scientism. Well-known astronomer Carl Sagan is famous for saying, the cosmos is all that is or ever was or ever will be. That embodies scientism, right? That the material world, that's the only reality, that's it. There's nothing else. Philosopher Daniel Dennett said, when someone puts forward a scientific theory that they really don't like, they just try to discredit it as scientism. But when it comes to facts and explanations of facts, science is the only game in town. So only science can explain reality. Only science can explain facts. Philosopher Alex Rosenberg, in an interview, said this.
And that was my mistake, to suppose that there were deeper explanations than those that the sciences provide.
So you basically realize that there are no deeper explanations except
correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's what scientism says. There are no deeper explanations than those that science provides, and science provides explanations for a broad range of questions that many people might look to philosophy or to religion for answers to.
So he says there's no deeper explanations than what science provides, and science provides explanations for a broad range of questions. You don't need philosophy, you don't need religions, because science provides the answers for everything. So if science is all there is, what does that lead to then in relation to our value, our meaning, our purpose, and morality? Listen to what Rosenberg says.
So is there a God? Of course not. What is the meaning of the universe? It doesn't have any. What is the purpose of life? Ditto. Is there a difference between right and wrong, good and bad? There's not a moral difference between them. What is the nature of the relationship between the mind and the brain? They're identical. The mind is the brain. Is there free will? Not a chance.
Okay, I'll give him credit. He's being consistent, right? He says if science is all there is, and there's no God, no meaning, no purpose, no good, no evil, and no free will. Historian of science William Provine shares his beliefs. He says, let me summarize my views on what modern evolutionary biology tells us loud and clear, and these are basically Darwin's views. So he believes evolution is a scientific fact. So what does that lead to? There are no gods, no purposes, and no goal-directed forces of any kind. There is no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning in life, and no free will for humans either. And this is why I keep saying that scientism is a religion. It's a worldview, because believing that science has the answers to everything impacts every area of life, right? And scientism is being taught to children as well. I want you to listen to this clip from a children's song from a group that was associated with the Disney Channel back in 2009.
Science is real, from the Big Bang to DNA. Science is real, from evolution to the Milky Way. I like those stories about angels, unicorns, and elves. Now I like those stories as much as anybody else, but when I'm seeking knowledge, either simple or abstract, the facts are with science. The facts are with science.
Oh, all right, let's look closely at the lyrics here, okay? So I'm going to give you a quiz, all right? So let's see how much you've learned from what I've said. So you say science is real from the Big Bang to DNA. Okay, what type of science is the Big Bang? Is it observational or historical? Historical, right? What is DNA? Observational, right? We can see that in the present. All right, from evolution to the Milky Way, what is evolution? What is the Milky Way? Right? We can see that. Right, very good. All right, you're learning well here. So you see what they did here? They equated historical and observational science, right? They're like, it's all the same thing. Children are being taught that they're the same even though they're very different. Now, they go on to say angels, right? So that's clearly representing the Bible. He's reading a book there. And the song says they're stories, right? Like mythical unicorns and elves. They're putting them all on the same level. And it's a great example, and I know Ken talked about this earlier, but it's a great example of why we should not use the term Bible stories, because it's often equated in our culture with things that are not true, right? This is a huge soapbox of mine because children are bombarded every day with anti-God, anti-science, anti-Christian messages, whether it's in school or on social media or in books or the internet, whatever it may be. They are taught that science is supreme, that science is factual and real, and that scientism is true. So if they go to church on Sunday and they hear the word stories being used in relationship to the Bible, then what are they going to think? Right? The Bible is just a bunch of make-believe stories. It's not facts. It's not real like science is. So we need to be really careful. We have to watch our words. We have to watch our terminology. And that's why it's better to say Bible events or record or account or history. We want them to believe the true gospel, right, and not the false gospel of scientism. All right, so let's go back to our lyrics here. So it says the facts are with science, and later on in the song it will say the truth is with science, the proof is with science. This is essentially scientism for kids. That's what it is. So let's summarize again what we've learned about scientism. So it says science, or the scientific method, is the only way to know truth and the reality about the world and everything in it, that it is an objective way of knowing and dealing with evidence and facts, that the material world is it, there is no immaterial, and it impacts every aspect of life, morality, purpose, meaning, all of that. All right. What are the problems with this? So let's talk about that. First of all, scientism is actually a self-refuting or self-defeating argument, because the claim that only scientific claims are valid is itself not a scientific claim, but a philosophical one. Because how do you apply the scientific method to test the claim that only scientific claims are valid? What experiment can you do to test that claim? There isn't one, all right? So let me walk you through this. So the scientism would claim that the only knowledge we can have about reality are those that have been properly tested in the hard sciences. And hard sciences, again, mean things like biology, chemistry, physics. So the question is, can you design an experiment using the hard sciences to verify this? Nope, I can't think of one, okay? I can't think of anything in biology, chemistry, or physics that would verify that. So scientism is making a philosophical claim that is outside the hard sciences, and therefore the original claim cannot be true. That's why it's self-defeating or self-refuting. Hard sciences really deal with the material world, and this is an immaterial claim that scientism makes. So it's self-refuting, but it also employs circular reasoning, which is another logical fallacy. So instead of offering evidence, the conclusion repeats the premise, and that's why it's a circle. So let me show you how this is true for scientism. So scientism has the premise that science is clear that God and angels do not exist because they cannot be measured or observed by science. Because if they existed, we could see them or detect them scientifically. So they conclude, immaterial reality, like God and angels, don't exist because scientific investigations don't detect it. Okay, that's a problem, all right? Because my counter to that would be, but what if there's a whole order of reality that is not material and can't be detected by science? Because just because you have no way to detect God and angels with scientific methods, it doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means you can't detect them with scientific methods, okay? So instead of offering any evidence as to why God and angels don't exist, which is their premise, the conclusion just restates the premise, and the premise is the same as the conclusion. They just literally said the same thing twice. Right? They didn't offer any evidence for why that really is the case. And it's also a form of what we call special pleading, okay? Because scientism made up the definition that science excludes the supernatural. So scientism is literally just one logical fallacy after another.